Hey there, in this lesson we're going to go ahead and start creating our own seamless textures in Photoshop. So if you want to follow along, go ahead, open up woodstarter number 1.psd and well, let's get started. So I'm going to run the following couple videos under the assumption that you have been to class and you understand what a texture map is, how they work, etc., etc., etc. And you are now beginning to understand the need to create your own custom texture maps. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you're creating a texture map, it's very important that you actually end up with hopefully a perfect square. That's a good way to start. Perhaps depending upon the geometry of your model, you may want to make something a little bit different. But if you don't know what it's going to be used on, a perfect square is a pretty good start. And I've always been told that when you're creating these squares, it's best to make them fit under the power of 2. So in this case, what we're going to do is our final image is going to be 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. And you can see we've got our little guides here that tell us exactly where it's going to be. So our final image is just going to be this big here. Okay, so what I've done is I put these guides out here because you don't want to watch me try and get these things out to exactly 2048. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to begin to start taking some of these parts and cutting them and moving them from one part to the other so that when we tile them, they will actually be a perfect match. But in order to do that, we want to make sure that all of these sort of horizontal lines are perfectly horizontal, okay? And really we're just going to be concerned with, is it horizontal between here and here? We don't really care what happens between here and here, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start dragging a few lines down. And these should be pretty good, all right? I'm not going to lie, I did a little bit of work on this beforehand to kind of make this a little bit easier. And that's entirely possible. You know, you may need to do 3 or 4 sort of mini sessions trying to just get your texture ready to be turned in to a texture map. Okay, now as you can see, these are looking, for the most part, pretty good. We're just going to keep dropping them in there. Maybe a little problem on this one here, but for the most part, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to zoom in here, take a look at what we have here. Zoom out a little bit. Not too shabby. Yep, that looks pretty good. Okay, so that was almost a moot point, but let's go ahead and zoom on out. If, for example, you do need to adjust that, what you're going to want to do is go ahead, select your object, select your surface, okay, and then get your cursor over next to one of the corners, right, and then go ahead and push down Control or Command on a Mac. You're going to get this little arrow here, and you can take that arrow and you can start to drag those corners up and around and back in order to get everything to sort of line up. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and Control Z out of that because I was pretty happy with it. Okay, don't apply. There we go. Okay, so now that we've done that, assuming we've done that, let's go ahead and we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, and the next step is we're going to take this particular section right here, we're going to cut it out and we're going to move it over there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to drag a marquee down, and that marquee, when you drag it down, is actually just going to snap to where you have those divisions. Okay, and now I'm going to right click in here. Oh, sorry, I didn't have the layer active, so now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to go layer via cut. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now what I have is actually 2 different layers. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go up to view because these are a little distracting, and I'm going to go ahead and just clear my guides for a second. All right, and so now I'm going to take this particular object here, I'm going to pick it up, and I'm just going to move it to the other side here, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and apply that transformation, and I'm going to move forward. Now, as you can see, we've got a little bit of a seam issue between here and here. We also have a bit of a color issue, but the good news is this line here and that line there will match up perfectly. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to try and blend these two areas together. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my lower level. I'm going to go to my eraser tool. Okay, and I'm going to take my opacity down to about 40%. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to say I'm going to get a big brush at the moment, and I'm getting some negative waves there because it doesn't seem to be selected my layer. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to crank this way up, and I'm just going to start to hit my brackets, my left bracket, in order to shrink this down a little bit. And one thing I really do not like to see ever on my textures is a perfectly straight line. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just trying to give a little bit of fade right in here. All right, it seems a little ridiculous, but it's actually pretty useful. All right, and so what I'm doing is I'm taking out those particular areas there, and in a moment I'm going to just do some large erasing, so this does seem a little odd, but believe it or not, this does make a difference to the trained and the untrained eye. I'm putting some little divots in here like that. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my opacity down, and I'm going to take my brush size up. So I'm going to hit my brackets again. I'm going to take my opacity way down. Maybe to like, yeah, about that. Okay, and now I'm going to start to slowly, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out now. Maybe I can take my opacity up just a hair. Now remember, I have a fuzzy brush, and so that's kind of helping to soften this up. And you can see here on this in the center, even though we kind of took out those areas there, those sort of side areas, you can really still see the ghosting or the remnants of what was once there. All right, in terms of something being a flat edge. I'm going to take this down to about 10% now, and I'm going to go ahead and pull from the top up. Okay, and now I'm going to take this way down, and I'm just going to start to sort of scribble along the sides there. Over, and maybe 3% is a bit low. There we go, 15%. And I'm going to start to go back and forth, back and forth. And I'm just trying to get a nice little fade. Okay, I like to do it here and see how good of a fade I can get without seeing the other layer below. And then I might have gotten a little too far. You don't want to get, you want to make sure you leave at least sort of 10 or 20% of this stuff on the far left side solid. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on now. All right, now we can still actually see where this once was. So now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to go back and forth and get rid of that seam there, get rid of that line. Okay. Now I'm going to go fairly fast because you guys don't want to get bored watching me use the eraser tool. But as you can see, I'm going to crank that up a little bit more. We're starting to really get a pretty nice blend there. That's actually pretty good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of select both of my layers, and I'm going to right click on them, and then I'm going to go ahead and just merge my layers. Okay, now that I've merged my layers, I'm going to go ahead and use my crop tool, and I'm going to snap over here, and I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. I've got my first crop. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put another line down here at 2048, and I'm going to repeat that process. So I'm going to pause the video while I get this guideline put in. And the way we put the guidelines is you simply snap up here into the grid line, and you want to go over here to 2048. So, all right, I'm going to pause the video while I get this in the correct spot.